I'd like to finish the afternoon's presentations with kind of a follow-on from the last plenary session vis-a-vis halal and its market challenges, market opportunities, discussing how ITC is really responding with some concrete tools, which through the Trade for Sustainable Development in cooperation with colleagues at ITC, my colleague Sadiq Saeed, we've developed a Halal Standards map or a Halal Standards comparison tool. If I could have the next slide, please. Thanks. So just to give you some background in terms of ITC's work in standards, we have developed a program called Trade for Sustainable Development that really focuses on voluntary or private standards in the, let's say, sustainability space. And so while halal standards may be in fact mandatory from a Muslim majority country perspective, in many cases in a Muslim minority country they're voluntary standards. In many cases they also contain sustainability parameters. So we've incorporated them in our project, and we've actually developed a tool that specifically addresses these issues related to halal standards. The T4SD program now counts several partners, 50 or more partners that we're working with that have signed on to principles in terms of harmonization, in terms of transparency of standards, and the promotion of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're looking for additional partners to work with us, including you today here at WEDF. And I'm going to go through a bit of the T4SD program just to give you a background before we move into the specific work that we've been doing on halal. So the T4SD program started about 7 years ago, and the genesis of the program was the proliferation of voluntary or private standards in the market. There was a lot of questions related to, okay, what are these standards all about? What criteria do they cover? How similar or not similar are they? What do they cost? What countries are they valid or accepted in? As a producer, as a farmer, as a trader, exporting to a country, what standards should I really concern myself with? Do I need to engage in this? And so there was many, many questions, but there were no real answers, and there's no place to go for those answers. So we decided to put together a tool that allowed that to happen. Next slide, please. So the tool is Standards Map. We launched it in early 2011 with a 2.0 version, which was launched in February of 2014. It's a tool that's free. It's a global public good. It's one of ITC's global public goods such as Trade Map and Market Access Map. And it can allow users, whether you're a producer, whether you're a trader, whether you're a consumer, even if you're a buyer or a retailer, so it really applies to the entire supply chain or value chain. It allows you to look and analyze standards at a very, very high level of detail and specificity to understand what is really, as we say, under the hood of the standards. Next slide. So we have now more than 180 on the system as of today. We keep on adding standards. We have a high demand from standard organizations worldwide to reference their systems on our tool, and we will continue to include additional standards. When you're saying what kind are we talking about? Well, we're talking about any type of, say, business-to-business standard like Global Gap, a business-to-consumer standard like Rainforest Alliance, organic standards such as USDA or the EU Organic, and even retailer or brand codes of conduct such as the Unilever SAC or, for example, the McDonald's Supplier Code. So we have also many private codes of conduct that are also on the system, as well as national standards, national organic standards. We have food safety standards, and we also are entering the services sector as well with tourism, sustainable tourism standards. So let's go back to the discussion we just had earlier about halal. So what are we doing in halal? The first thing I want to mention is that we've just launched the Halal Goes Global report, okay, which is really a report spearheaded by my colleague Sadiq, and also Abdul Hamid, who spoke on the last panel, also contributed heavily to this report. It's the first of its kind. It's really aimed at understanding what are the drivers of halal trade. What's the regulatory framework that surrounds this trade? and how can halal and how can this whole industry really be integrated into global value chain. So it's really about what we're all about at ITC, is really providing transparency on information, providing access to information that is difficult to come by. It's a new publication. It's available both in print, so at the back of the room there are print copies that you can take with you, and as well you can access it online. You can download it, and it's there free of charge for you. It is new. It is the first of its kind that we've published at ITC, so we're also open to feedback. So if you have any questions or comments, if you have case studies that you think would be really interesting to incorporate, we also really urge you to contact us so we can incorporate your feedback. So let's now turn to the tool, the Halal Standards Map. So this tool has just been launched about a week ago. It's online. It's basically www.standardsmap.org/halal. That's how you access it. Right now there are about 8 halal standards on the platform. We're continuing to add more through the course of our work. We should have about, I think, 13 standards on the system in the next month or so. If I could have the next slide. And it really follows the same logic as the Standards Map web tool, where I just mentioned that we have the 180 sustainability-related standards on the system. So it allows users to basically identify, search for their type of standard based on their parameters. So for example, the product they produce, the country they produce that product in, where they want to export or sell that product, or they can actually do a keyword search. So if you know the standard of interest, then you can basically just type it in, and it's an alphabetically sensitive search. Next slide, please. So here is an example of a typical search you could do. I mean, we have 4 halal initiatives that we have chosen. The first is the Moroccan halal standard, then we have SMEEK. Then the third, there's no logo, but that's the Swiss halal standard for the Swiss market, followed by the Malaysian food standard, the Halal Malaysian standard. And then you could also search a 5th if you'd want. What the system allows you to do is really look at the requirements in a quantitative way to say, okay, where are the requirements clustering in terms of what I have to do as a producer? And then, next slide, please. Also, what are the systems approach, or what are the systems that underlie the standard? So it's nice to know these are the requirements that I need to implement as a producer, but also, and this was also touched upon, I would say, quite heavily in the prior plenary, is who organizes this standard? What is the certification system of the standard? Who accredits the certifying body? What are the criteria to essentially accredit a certifying body? All these, how often do we need to be certified? This information can be found, I should say, in the Halal Standards Map tool. So it allows you not only to look at criteria, but also the systems that underlie those criteria. Because there was a new term I learned today, halal washing. I mean, we all know about the term greenwashing, but we learned about halal washing, which is where you could have a wonderful standard that has 300 criteria, but if those criteria are hinging upon very, very weak implementation type mechanisms, well then obviously you're looking at not a very rigorous standard, and you're prone to either greenwashing or, in this case, halal washing. Next slide, please. Once you've actually identified the standard you want to look at, you've looked at the various, let's say, systems information, then you can compare these standards side by side. So this is really where you compare, from an apples to apples perspective, the types of initiatives you're looking at to say, okay, how do these standards, are they very similar? Do they contain the same criteria? When is that criteria required? Is it required the day one when I need to be certified, or do I have more time to implement those criteria? And in the case of Standards Map, across these 180 or so that we have, I mean, the types of implementation criteria vary significantly. So it's very good from a user perspective to understand. It's also good, and this is something else that was touched upon earlier, it's also about benchmarking or harmonization. Where can we find, let's say, the raw data, the baseline to make any type of harmonization or benchmarking or mutual recognition type analyses or studies. And this provides a very nice template or baseline for that. And we've done that in T4SD on the voluntary standard side with many companies and international or public-private organizations in Europe and in North America, where we've actually benchmarked standards using our system. Next slide, please. In a similar fashion, you can look at the standards side by side, from this view where you have the criteria on the left-hand column, and then you have the various standards, whether they actually contain that criteria, yes or no. So you can see really at a glance where they differ or where they're similar. And that's also a nice feature. Next slide. And then also getting the specific, let's say, chapter and verse. What is the standard content? What does it say in the standard? And there you have it in the system. I should note, important, very important, we don't rank or value judge or put stars or rankings or any type of smiley face on the standards. We're a UN organization, so this data is completely neutral. We let the user decide for her or himself what their needs are, what their point of view is, in order for them to make the right decision. The data is verified by the standard system before it's uploaded onto the web, and even before we give the system or the standard system access to their data record, it's verified by our staff both in Geneva, and also we have external consultants that review it. So there's a quality control process that is in place. And last but not least, and I would say quite importantly, is the self-assessment. So it's a new functionality that we put into the Standards Map tool in 2014, where we built in a self-assessment or a diagnostic tool that allows a user, a producer, a trader, a processor of a product to really go into the system and self-assess themselves against the standard criteria, to answer a series of questions related to that specific standard so they know more or less their roadmap to becoming compliant. What is the gap? What is left that they have to do in order to be compliant? And we can roll this self-assessment out. It can be done by anyone, or we can do it in the context of trainings, where we actually bring standard experts to the training, and we work with the producers to answer their questions, to put them in their context, to get a very, let's say, reliable result. With the self-assessment, here's another screenshot. It just takes you through a very logical process, step by step. The actual type of criteria for each standard is presented to you, and you can answer yes, no, and provide basically corroborating data as to how you comply with that criteria. And then at the end, you have a dashboard where you're allowed to see more or less where you are vis-a-vis the various criteria. This goes for the Halal standards and as well as the other sustainability standards we have. Really, on a quantitative basis, each criteria, whether it's an environmental criteria, whether it's a food quality or safety criteria, whether it's a labor or social criteria, and then below, which you don't see on this screen, is more or less the way forward, the roadmap to actually compliance, hitting those criteria which are most crucial based on that standard in terms of how they prioritize them. So in terms of the next steps, I mean, we will be continuing to upload additional halal standards in the system. We can create customized self-assessments for a specific halal initiative in a specific language for a specific national context to capacitate producers in the country or in a region. And so there's a lot of functionality, a lot of, let's say, flexibility that we have, and we've built into the system that allows it to be tailored for many different uses. So that's where I'll end on the halal and the standards type discussion. What I would like to just, if you indulge me for a few more moments, I think we have maybe 5 or 6 minutes to indulge your time. I'd like to just talk about a new initiative that we just launched with our executive director, Arantxa Gonzalez, a few weeks ago in New York at the General Assembly. It's called the Blue Number Initiative, and it is related to both the Halal Standards Map and the overall T4SD project in general. And it's basically our response to how can we at ITC really implement in a very concrete way the SDGs, specifically SDG 2, about sustainable agriculture, SDG 8 in terms of decent work, and SDG 12 in terms of sustainable consumption and production. And these, as Abdul Hamid mentioned, they do cut across the halal sector as well. So the Blue Number Initiative is about giving the farmer, the upstream farmer, or the upstream trader, giving them a voice, letting them have visibility. Because right now in global supply chains, they don't have that voice. They're hidden. They're not really part of the larger picture. And it's really a very transactional relationship between the farm, or the, let's say, upstream processor, and the buyer. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to issue them a global location number free of charge. So one number free for each company, okay? And this is basically going to be, the pilot is in the agro-food sector. So that's the sector that we're kind of limiting to ourselves at the beginning, but I think it has a lot of applicability to halal producers, especially, for example, in livestock, in the dairy sector, for example, that was also mentioned. So what we can do is we're going to give these farmers, these agri-food businesses, a blue number, which is based on the GS1, the Global Standard 1 system. So Global Standard 1 is a non-for-profit global organization. They have a kind of a franchise model in each country, where each country, so for example, there's a GS1 office here in Qatar, they issue numbers, either location numbers or product numbers. So any barcode you see on a product, or a book, everyone knows the ISBN number. Any book you buy in the world has an ISBN number. It's the International Standard Book Number. GS1 has a language of business, and so we're leveraging the GS1 system to allocate numbers, these location numbers, to farms. We're doing that through our ITC portal, and what we need is basically 5 data points. So we need the name of the company or the farm, we need the gender of the owner, the product they produce, we need their geolocation coordinates, and we need an email or a phone number. And with that, you get a blue number. Then later on, next year, you can improve your profile. You can go beyond the 5 data points to maybe 15 data points, 20 data points, which, for example, can be a photograph of your operation, could be a video of you and the farm or your harvest work. It could be certificates of certification to Global Gap, to Rainforest. It could be an incorporation certificate from your local Chamber of Commerce, an ISO certificate, it could be anything. Then you could actually upload additional data, so the number of employees, your turnover, who you trade with, any type of information that's relevant, that's germane to your business. And then you can share that information when you want and with who you want, based on your own privacy parameters. So the way that I would picture this is picture it as a Facebook or a LinkedIn for farmers, okay? That's the best way to look at it. I mean, it's just kind of like, okay, I'm on Facebook and I know many of you in the audience, I met you today, yesterday, now I can share my information with you, and up to a certain level of comfort. That's the exact same concept. So this is what a map looks like of the current farmers in the system. So we have now over 60,000 farmers that have registered since we launched in September, and it's growing. We're getting other additional farmers on every week. This map, it's color-coded, so blue farmers are women and orange farmers are men. Have the next slide, please. Then you can drill down further into a country. So these are coffee farmers that are essentially represented by the Colombian Coffee Association. There's the logo up in the right-hand corner. And there you see the distribution of coffee farmers in FNC. So we have about 55,000 of them. And the nice thing is you can identify where they are on the map for a lot of different reasons. If I could have the next slide. So with that, you can look at various attributes. You can see from Google Earth where they are. So how does this help? Well, what if you're a marginalized farmer, very, very far from a population center? Your access to transportation, your access to a port or even resources is constrained. So this helps governments know, okay, how do I really help? Where are the farmers that need help maybe the most from a geographic perspective? But also look at it from a land titling perspective. If you can prove that you have title to your land, which is very useful for accessing credit, or, for example, to prove a deforestation claim so that you're not deforesting your land for many of the environmental certifications. This type of information, when captured over time, can really help. And with any profile, you can load in any type of data that you would like to actually talk about your let's say, performance or your attributes as a farm. Next slide, please. So the final, let's say, step is really to post this on a portal, on a website. We're calling it right now the Sustainability Marketplace. That will probably change in terms of the name by the time we launch it early next year. But at the end of the day, this is what a typical page would look on this Facebook or LinkedIn for farmers, where you have on the top part of the page, you have the photo of the farmer, his blue number, the product, what standards they're certified to. Then below, more information on really where they are in terms of their journey when it comes to their performance against a halal standard or against any other standard initiative. And then below, you have the access to the resources of the World Wide Web, because this can be plugged into any type of web resource. So you want to find out about local trainings in your area. You want to find out about funding providers that are lending to SME companies. Resources, any type of information that you think can be possible, we can plug that in. I mean, I would think of it as kind of an iPhone where any type of app can be brought in. So it's really leveraging the power of the web while at the same time giving the farmer the visibility. So I will leave it at that, and happy to answer any questions you have. Our website, standardsmap.org, is on the slide. Please feel free to access that. The Halal Standards Map is just with a /halal after the standardsmap.org. And any interest in joining us in terms of the Blue Number Initiative, please feel free to contact me, and we can talk about ways to bring your farms, your agribusinesses onto the system. So thanks very much.